Good morning. This is Jason Dean at Film Fanatic. Um, Hope everyone's doing good. It's about 9:30 on a Wednesday. This is our first day of snow. We had some snow here this morning, so it's pretty cool. Hope everyone's doing good. So I want to thank everybody for checking out the page. Just the other day, I decided to change the name for the YouTube channel to just Film Fanatic to kind of make it a little bit more focused on what I'm doing. I still, mix up things. I have quite a few quantum videos here up on the channel. Um, Again, that's something that's just kind of a natural extension for this whole thing and for what I try to do. So, I have videos up there, but I decided, it's 98% of what I'm doing on this channel is all like straight up movie reviews and I'm starting to move into the interview world a little bit more. I'm trying to do that more. So I decided to just change the name and keep it centralized on just about movies, and so the name now is Film Fanatic. So I really appreciate everybody's input and for checking out the videos. Some of quite a few of the videos have a lot of hits now in the thousands range, and I really appreciate that. It's really awesome. It means a lot, and it's super fun, and it just kind of inspires me to keep cranking out these videos. And again, it's a lot easier for me to do these videos. I try to do one a day. It's pretty easy to do them now as far as schedule wise and the setup that I have. And it's also, I find the more I do it, like anything, the more you do it, the better, you kind of hopefully get at it and you develop a little bit more of a skill set. I'm trying to move forward in focusing more on doing interview segments. So stay tuned for more shows um, involving having guests on the show. I really love that format, and it's really interesting, and I learn a lot from it, and find it's pretty entertaining. It breaks away from just kind of the everyday thing of me talking about certain things. So um, yeah, so it's uh, it's a fun it's a fun kind of new venture. And yesterday I was talking a little bit. Um, I did a video yesterday, and I talked a lot about other YouTube guys and sources of inspiration. And obviously, um, my passion for films has developed tremendously, and it's something I get more and more into. And I've been collecting more and more movies. I just recently I've been buying more movies, so it's been really great. So I have even more of a collection of films that I'm really eager to talk about and to bring light to. And I was talking a little bit about the inspiration I've gotten from certain YouTube guys, and and it's an interesting thing. I got in a discussion with a friend, my friend Nikki, about it last night or yesterday, and she's really great. She's a great friend. She's always been really supportive of this channel and just in general. So, but I was talking about the the kind of the way that our culture kind of is now around YouTube. It's a funny thing. My one of my best friends, Sean Russell, who I actually had on the show, and he's a really great friend. He was a key player in helping me, or a key player in exposing me to so many great movies and so much great music, and kind of helped shape me into the film fanatic that I am now. I owe a lot to him, and he was a guest on the show last year, and it was a super fun time, and it was really great. He's a super talented guy, one of the smartest guys I know. But I remember a few months ago we were talking about, like, I would send him some links to some YouTube guys that he liked or that I liked, and then there were a couple of things I sent him of movies that we both liked, and these guys on YouTube were also or were reviewing them, and they just completely trashed a lot of these films, and but they did it in a different way, and it became, and I talked about that yesterday. Um, and it's something I think about a lot. I probably think about it too much, but it's a thing. I think for me, it's something I try not to take too many things seriously. But there's certain things I take very, very seriously, and I think the reason I think about it a lot and that it weighs on my head a lot is because I do take it very seriously. And the whole thing is around as far as how our culture is now, as far as particularly around YouTube. When, like I said, like there's a couple of guys, Chris Stuckman and Moods, who's a Canadian film reviewer, who Chris Stuckman mostly focuses on. They both are horror reviewers, and Chris Stuckman mostly focuses on newer films, newer horror films, and to a degree more commercial horror films. And Moods covers a lot of the grindhouse films. That's how I've gotten exposed to so many cool movies over this past few years. He also covers all kinds of stuff too. I mean, he does documentaries. He does, he does more commercial things too. But his primary focus is kind of the deep dive aspect of the whole genre. So I from both of those guys, like they have a totally different kind of thing of what they talk about, but I've learned a lot from them. And I think they're really great podcasters. They're really smart. They're like literally like encyclopedias on all things movies. They have amazing collections. They have a lot of knowledge, and their whole way of putting out their reviews is I think is really fair and really balanced. They're articulate. They're really passionate. They've spent those thousands of hours checking out films, so I feel like they're when it comes down to it, they're actual like they're authority figures in that world. Like they know what they're talking about because they've put in the time, and they have great taste, and they're open minded. And and there's been many times where I've like watched their shows, and there's maybe a film that they review that I love, and they might not like, or they give it a pretty bad review. And but the way they do it is always in a way of where I feel like it's still respectful to a degree of the filmmaker, and especially if it's a filmmaker that has a body of work, where they give the respect due. They don't just they're not into this thing of completely dismissing the artist. And the other thing that they do is because they're so articulate with what they do and how they do it, they really give a good case for whether they like a movie or whether they don't like a movie. They give a good case for kind of backing up what they're talking about. And even if I totally disagree, it makes you think. You're like, okay, I agree with that. Like that's a good way to put it. And it's because they do it in a respectful, articulate way. And I was talking about that with my friend Sean, where I had sent him some links to some guys that were on movies that we mutually had a deep love for, and these guys were kind of trashing it, and he was like, this is one of the reasons I don't, and Sean was saying more or less, this is one of the reasons I don't really subscribe to a lot of guys on YouTube, because he felt like it's on the negative side, it's a thing now where like everybody and their grandmother grabs a microphone and a laptop or some editing software, and is suddenly they see a handful of movies and suddenly they're a movie critic, and then they just go out there and they haven't invested the time into really checking out film, like where they put in those thousands of hours. They haven't really done that. But then it becomes a point because, and they're not really that articulate. They're not very knowledgeable. But the thing that happens a lot is that they sell their channels on a lot of things around the negativity. So like if they review something, and they don't like it, they kind of make it to a point of where they almost come across as bullies, and they don't have any really respect for the filmmakers at all. They don't do it in an articulate way. They just trash them completely and totally dismiss them, and basically say, well, this person or this guy or this girl or this style of film has no merit. So because they don't like it, so they just dismiss it. And we've talked. I mean, Sean and I have talked about that a lot, and it's a thing of where And it seems with a lot of YouTube guys, it's a thing of where that's their selling point, because it's like kind of like that scenario of if you're like driving and you see a car accident, people tend to drive down because it's like a mess, and it's like, you know, uh, and it's just like a train wreck. And a lot of these YouTube guys kind of use that angle because it's kind of salacious and over the top and kind of confrontational, kind of angry. They use that as like kind of the selling point for their channel or their shows. Um, and they use that because they lack any real other any other skills in any other department, or really even articulating what they really mean, or giving a good case for whether they are giving something thumbs up or thumbs down. And I felt like that it does make sense, and that's kind of how I feel a lot of the times with certain people that I've checked out that have millions. Like this one guy in particular, without using names, this one guy in particular who is a huge guy on YouTube, and he has this kind of demeanor where I feel like that's what kind of what he does, and he comes across as a little bit of a bully. He comes across where he is his way, or you know, his way or no way, or no way, like nothing. If he doesn't like it, then it's out. It's thrown into trash. There's no justification for anything that they're doing for those, in regards to the filmmakers, or that particular genre. And they use things of like, well, it's just, like, for example, they'll use things like, well, that movie was just, it's just too weird, it's too strange, I don't really get it, so it's just kind of dumb because I don't understand it, and it's weird, so I'm just going to dismiss it and throw it away and say that it doesn't really carry any water. And they don't do it in a way of like where it's articulate or smart, and they come across as like, uh, kind of like a big fat meathead when they're explaining something as to why they don't like it. And it almost becomes this thing of, and I've seen it too with music, where they almost come across as like this kind of angry grandpa kind of thing, and they're just like so narrow in their views. And for me, it's not a thing when I see that kind of thing happen. It's not really a thing of where, it has nothing to do with whether you really like something or not. That's beyond it. It's uh, it's the way you do your demeanor, And I think there's certain artists and filmmakers and musicians that even if you don't like their work, which is perfectly fine, I'm glad that not everybody has the same opinion. There should be more of that, where people have more diverse opinions, but it's the way you can express it. I think should change. It won't ever, but it should change. And it should be a little bit more of an open mindedness to having an opinion and not getting your feelings, feeling like you're getting your feelings hurt, or where you get butt hurt over it. And I don't usually engage with YouTube guys that kind of do things like that, but I've done it a couple times. And one of the analogies that I made was, okay, well, two examples, and I've said this before, but it's something I think about a lot. This one guy in particular, who's a podcaster, or YouTube guy, he does mostly about 98% of the things that he covers on his channel are all horror movies, and some of his stuff I really like, and but there's always moments of where I watch some of his videos, and there's times of where I'm just like, I find myself just where I get completely pissed off and I get completely outraged, where I'm like, I can't believe he's saying this. And again, it's not that big of a deal, but it's something I'm passionate about, and it obviously does irk me. Um, and one example of it is this one guy who I won't mention. He's huge. He's one of the biggest guys on YouTube. He has, millions of followers. He's able to make a living off of his channel. And he covers a fairly good mixture of films. I mean, he covers a lot of like newer horror films. Like he just did a review recently on, the new Terrifier movie, or like Barbarian, which I haven't seen, or I haven't seen either of those. But then he'll do a lot of the old school ones from like the 80s, but he seems to have a cutoff point. Like he'll do movies like Sleepaway Camp or the Friday 13th movies, things like that, and or Phantasm, Child's Play. He'll do movies like the early 80s, which are great movies, and he'll mix it up. But he doesn't really go before that. He doesn't really cover anything in the 70s or he doesn't really take any deep dives about into other films that might have helped to say inspire these more modern films that predated these modern films by many years. And that's fine. He can cover whatever he wants to cover. Like Chris Stuckman doesn't cover really too many older films. It's pretty much all like contemporary films. But he's great. He's great at it. So, but he was talking on this one show where he is friends with a bunch of guys that on social media or whatever groups, Facebook groups or whatever, where a lot of his friends or the groups that he's part of, they're really into a lot of the giallo Italian horror films, exploitation films that like came out in the late '60s and '70s and '80s, and and those films are that genre. Again, I love all kinds of movies and all kinds of styles, but that period and those respective genres are my favorite. And I do a lot of shows where I talk about those kinds of films, including today. So but in this one video, he was talking about how he's surrounded by a lot of guys that are really into the whole horror exploitation world, a lot of the Italian and European and the American cinema from that period. And he said that he's had conversations with them about it at numerous times, and they have like suggested movies for him and to check out, like you should check out this Lucio Fulci movie or this older obscure Dario Argento movie or blah blah blah. And he said that like over time he's checked out only like maybe two or three of those films, and then so he'll basically kind of give a review or talk about what he feels, like his feelings on that genre. And he'll basically say things of like, well, the movies are. I generally don't like. He would say things like, I generally don't like movies that were from the '70s or these Italian exploitation horror films because they're too dated. They don't stand the test of time. The acting is really bad. The editing is bad. Some of the cinematography is okay. The gore isn't very good. He'll just basically go 1 through 10. He'll just say how he doesn't like the movie, and he talks about how he just doesn't get it. It's dated, and he just kind of like has this thing of where once he gets to that point of saying that in his review he'll just say, well, he'll just dismiss it and say, well, it's not really important. Like these directors didn't really, weren't really saying anything, and it's all dated, and he'll just dismiss it entirely. And then in the reviews too, like he'll try to bring up names of Italian directors, and he clearly doesn't know anybody in the genre, and he makes this like sweeping judgment of where he just dismisses it, and he doesn't say. Rather, he could do. He could a different way. He could do it in a more respectful way, where he could say, like, say Lucio Fulci, my favorite Italian director. He could say, well, okay, I don't really. These movies are a little bit dated. They're cheesy. The budgets are too low. The gore factor is like is not really my cup of tea. Blah blah blah. And it's not my jam. I'm not really into that style. I like things that might have a little bit of a higher production value. Blah blah blah. But I have to give props to Lucio Fulci as being, a real pioneer and one of the greatest kind of filmmakers in a way. Even though I don't like his films, he went on to influence so many filmmakers in the world. He's, I mean, he left an incredible legacy. So I have to give props to the Italian directors, and it's like the case in point, Lucio Fulci, for being a real pioneer in the genre. I might not like their stuff, but what those guys did and during that time, was kind of legendary, so that commands respect. But with him, he won't do that. He'll just, because he doesn't like it and doesn't understand it, which is fine, he'll just dismiss it and not give those directors their credibility or their legacy any legitimacy. And to me, that's where I'm like, that is just ignorant, and to me is just uh, uneducated and just completely stupid. Um, and and I get outraged by that because I I'm like, wow, okay, this guy has millions of followers, and he probably has lots of young people who watch his channel, and he's kind of spewing this bullshit of this real narrow, with of where he's like talking from this totally narrow-minded, ignorant uh, uh, worldview of movies, and he's got this huge audience, and it's like, no, he should be a little bit more fair and respectful of something that he doesn't like, and I don't usually engage with people on YouTube about that kind of thing, but there's been a couple times where I felt, because I was so irked by it, I felt inclined to engage, and I remember leaving a comment on his page, this guy's page, and I he hasn't responded, and that's fine, but I left a comment on his page saying, um, I think, I was more or less saying, well, I think, maybe you should check out, when it comes to, say, Italian horror films, the exploitation horror films, there's like literally, thousands, if not millions, of movies that were made during that whole period. Like, there's so many directors, there's so many films that came out, and I had suggested something like, well, maybe, instead of making your judgment based on just maybe three movies that you see, you know, it's such a huge genre, even with all the Giallo films. Maybe do a little bit more research before you come to this conclusion. Check out more movies. It's a whole other universe, multiple universes, just in that genre alone. So maybe check out more of those films. Take the time to actually check them out, and then base your opinion on that, whether or not you like something or not. Um, but I feel like, and I was saying, maybe take the time to check out this world of cinema first before you make that judgment call, and you decide just on a personal level you don't like it. And again, it's nothing to do with really, at the end of the day, if you like something or not. My whole thing was that, and then I also said in the comment, you also have this really narrow view where you base it on seeing three or four movies, but then you give you don't give any credibility to any of the Italian directors, or or give their legacy, like Lucio Fulci, for example. You don't give them any kind of legitimacy that they actually had an impact, and they were iconic figures in the horror genre that changed cinema. You just dismiss it entirely, and I feel like that's not really fair. That's not fair at all. And I said something to. I often make this analogy where I use it in more of a music term, or in music terms. And I remember saying this in my post on his YouTube channel. I said, one of the analogies I often make and I often talk about it is, as far as taste and respect for someone, and how you can be critical of something, but then you got to also give some respect if that person is deserving of it. And I said, use the analogy of say, for instance, the Grateful Dead. uh, I'm not a fan of their music really by any means. I don't really like their music. I've tried and tried to uh, check out their music. I've checked out lots of their studio albums. I've listened to tons of their live stuff, because they're a band that's more well known as far as being a live band. You know, there's even lots of Grateful Dead fans that don't like their studio albums but love their live stuff. So I've invested a lot of time over the years, checking out this stuff. And then I also have friends uh, here, and I'm also in bands. There's two bands that I'm in that we do some Grateful Dead songs. So I'm around that, and I've been exposed to all, and I spent the time checking out all this music. And I said, so I was using this as an example where, like I don't consider myself a fan really by any means of the Grateful Dead. It's just not really my bag. I've taken the time to really check it out, and it's not really, I don't really dig it. It's not what I'm into. I'm not really into the whole like quote unquote jam band thing, like groups like Fish and blah blah blah. But I was saying, like, individually, I think Jerry Garcia was an amazing guitar player. I think he was a really amazing guitar player, pretty innovative. I've always kind of liked a lot of the stuff that Mickey Hart has done over the years. An amazing percussionist, drummer. He played for with them for years, and he's put out a bunch of solo albums that are pretty good. Um, uh, but at the end of the day, I don't really like it. It's not my jam. It's not my cup of tea. I've tried digging him, but I'm just not into it. But that being said, I completely give the Grateful Dead huge amounts of respect of where I feel like, these guys essentially were one of the first kind of totally off the radar independent bands to literally create their own universe with no airplay. And it was a total grassroots thing. They built this incredible legacy from nothing, and to where now, and they also went on to influence, millions of other bands, and that whole kind of scene where bands can kind of sustain themselves and kind of where they're off the grid and not in the commercial light, where these bands can now, you know, have a life and be very successful. And I attribute that to what the Grateful Dead did. And I feel like even though I don't like their music really at all, I have total respect for them. Like because and they deserve that. And I said that's the difference. That's the difference in my argument and your argument. Whereas like I can totally not like something, but if I look at the legacy of what this artist has left behind, and it's significant, and culturally, it has, uh, it was a game changer. That commands respect, and you can't make it because I don't like. I could easily have taken a position of being like, well, I don't like the Grateful Dead; they're just trash, and fuck them, and I don't, I don't give them any merit, and I just kind of dismiss it and throw it in the trash. That's a totally different argument, and that to me, if I was to do that, and people do it all the time, but if I was to do that, that's just dumb and ignorant. So that was like how I used. That was what I had said in the post, and my critique of how he goes about doing his show. So, but it is what it is, and so enough of that. I'm gonna go on to why we're actually here. So this is a movie called Revenge of the Living Dead Girls. This movie, I did a review of this film, and I did a post, my usual like Facebook post kind of thing that I usually do on Facebook. I did a review of this film last year. I bought this movie. It was last year. Revenge of the Living Dead Girls. I did a review on this film a while back, and then when I was doing the Facebook Live videos, I did a review of this film. And this was a movie I had never seen. I bought this at Bull Moose. Surprise, surprise. I bought this at Bull Moose, and I had never seen it before, but I was just intrigued by the cover. It looked super sleazy and just incredibly low budget and kind of crappy. And I was like, this looks awesome, and the artwork is great, and so I bought it. The other thing too that was cool was that, and I didn't know it until afterwards, but when I bought the movie, it came with a bonus disc, and the bonus disc is the film score for the film. And I've lucked out over the last year or so. I haven't lately movies I bought have I noticed that hasn't been a thing, but I've lucked out in the past with certain other films. A couple Lucio Fulci movies where the the package came with a soundtrack for the within the Blu-ray package, and I thought that was pretty awesome. I have two other soundtracks by Lucio Fulci. House by the Cemetery, which is like my favorite Lucio Fulci film. I'm going to be doing a review on that soon, which is just amazing. And then another Lucio Fulci, Warriors in the year 2049, which is this like kind of bonkers sci-fi movie he did, which is an awesome movie. That well, so both those movies came with soundtracks, and I listened to those to death. And then this movie also came with the soundtrack, and it's pretty awesome. And this movie is really, oh man, it's super sleazy. Like, and the backstory behind this film is just totally awesome, and it's got this whole when you the interview segments are just super interesting, and you really get a sense of kind of where this movie kind of came from. It was written and directed by Pierre B. Renhard, and he's a French director. And his background, there's a really great interview with Pierre on this Blu-ray, and his whole background as a filmmaker, he was a porn director. He totally made like straight up porn movies for like I believe like 10 years before he started making horror films. And so and I when I watched this movie, I'd never seen it before, and then I really love this movie, and I've seen it a bunch of times since I bought it, and I noticed it's one of those films that I enjoy it more and more. The first time I saw it, I was like, I don't know if I really like this, and then I found myself getting into it more and more, and then by the ending, I was like, yeah, this is great. Um, and then each time I've watched it since then, I'm like totally hooked. The minute I put it on, and I'm like really engaged with it. And I think it's pretty awesome, and I noticed that happens each time I watch it. So I have grown to really love this movie, and it's like grown on me uh, by leaps and bounds. And it's just like a classic, super low budget, sex exploitation slash horror exploitation movie. And then when I watched the special features after I watched the film with Pierre, I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense, because there's a lot of this movie is super sleazy. It's super sleazy. Um, and there are scenes of full like frontal nudity that are just like really graphic and kind of horrific at times. But the movie is so campy and cheesy that it kind of plays out like a comedy. But there are scenes in it that are just really uh, just completely like you kind of can't believe you're seeing it without spoiling it. But there's a couple of scenes in this movie that are really graphic. But again, if the movie was like, I guess, more serious, it would be harder to take and hard to watch. But being that the movie is so goofy and silly, at least to me, it kind of plays out almost like a comedy. Even though I don't think they meant Pierre you know, made this was set out to make it as a comedy. I just think it was kind of so badly done in certain ways that you're like, wow, I can't believe this got made. But then it just has enough. It strikes the right chord. I think that it kind of works in its own totally weird way. And there's a couple of scenes in it where there's it. It's kind of a zombie movie. It is, and it isn't. It looks like it's going to be a zombie movie, and it kind of is, but then it's not really at all. And I don't want to give away any kind of spoilers around it, because I do think you should see it. It has this ending in the film where it's just like I remember the first time I saw it, and I still have a reaction, but the ending of the film, I remember I was just like, what the hell just happened? I was just like, I didn't see it coming. Even though, like, since I've seen the movie quite a few times since then, now I can kind of see how that happened, or where it was going. But it's still like kind of a shock at the end, and you're like, this is totally weird and totally strange. I didn't expect it. And then you kind of realize, wait, this isn't a zombie movie at all. Um, but there's a couple of scenes in the film where it's kind of centered on these girls that are essentially these zombies that come back from the grave. There's this crazy scientist in the film where he creates this like some kind of form of like a toxic waste in his laboratory, but this toxic waste is able to bring people back from the dead and turn them into like living zombies. So these girls have the scientist, this crazy scientist, like dumps this ooze or this slime on their graves, and they come back. And so initially you're like, oh, okay, this is like a zombie movie, even though it's not at all. That's kind of how it is. And but there's a scene in it where they corner this guy in the film, and there's three zombie girls, three quote unquote zombie girls, and one of them proceeds to like they capture this guy, they corner this guy, and they're gonna kill him. But before they kill him, one of the girls, the zombie girls, gives him a blow job, and basically eats his penis off. And it's a real quick cut, but it's so freaking outrageous. And you see it for a second, you actually see everything. But it's so freaking outrageous, and I was just like, I've never seen that ever on film. Like, and it's hilarious. But there's actually a scene where a zombie girl gives a guy essentially a blowjob and just eats his penis off, and it was just like, you got to be kidding me. And it's really short, quick cuts, but you can see what's going on. And then there's another scene which is almost the same thing, where these zombie girls corner this one. They basically capture this girl, and she's, and again, this movie is like super sleazy. They capture this girl, and she's like in this house, and then they like have her in this bedroom, and there's like kind of this rapey scene, and it's kind of like this lesbian scene where suddenly all these three zombie women are trying to have sex with this girl. And one of the zombie girls, pulls out this like giant sword and sticks it up her vagina. And it's just like completely outrageous. And you're just like, what? Like, clearly, I've never seen something like this before. But it's hilarious too, even though it's totally messed up. It's freaking hilarious. But those two scenes in particular were just like hilarious and completely shocking at the same time. And when I watched the special features of this film and the interviews with Pierre, you get a sense. Oh, okay, this totally makes sense. This is where this guy was coming from. He was a full-on porn director. This was like his first non-pornography film that he directed. So you're like, oh, okay, this guy made a career for a long time as like a porn director, like full-on porn, and he decided to venture into like making more, genre horror films, exploitation films. And so it has a lot of those qualities of a porn movie, but it's done in a horror genre, and it's just a totally bizarro blending of those two kind of genres. And that's a thing too that I've come across a lot with digging into the whole world of exploitation, is a lot of these directors came out of the world of pornography, or they kind of went more into that later in their careers, but they all have that background to some degree, and you can see how it is very much an element, and still very much so in a lot of these exploitation movies. Particularly in like the sex exploitation movies, and like movies that I've covered, like Scream in the Streets, which is like pretty much a full-on porn, but it's definitely an exploitation movie, and it is a horror movie, but it's full on porn to a degree. And there's a few other movies that I've covered that have that, and almost they almost cross that line to where they do show penetration, so they are technically, you can definitely consider them to be porn, even though they are horror films or action films. But you see that with the Nazi exploitation movies, for instance. That's a thing. And then there's also the sex exploitation films, and then the horror exploitation films. A lot of these films all have a commonality. Like I said, a lot of these directors worked in the porn industry, so a lot of these films have this super sleazy, dirty element to it, and I just think it's hilarious and great when you blend that with genres like horror, the horror genre, or with a lot of the giallo films, where you have these suspense thrillers and you have that as an element. So I don't know. I find it as a it was a super fascinating period of filmmaking where like that does not happen anymore with films, but you have these guys that came from very different backgrounds, and it just adds this completely over the top, and incredibly, and also this this high level of like sleaze to their films. It's pretty outrageous. There was a movie I did a review a while back called The Ravager, and that movie is just like completely outrageous. Two movies I can think of are probably the most outrageous films as far as like blending the horror or action with the sex. The Ravager and Scream in the Streets, like completely outrageous, but incredibly fun at the same time. So I highly recommend this film. The Blu-ray for this transfer is pretty amazing. This came out in 1987, and it's a French film with English subtitles. Just amazing. And like I said, the interviews on here, the special features on this film are just pretty tremendous and super interesting. I love this film. It's grown on me quite a bit. Like I said before, I first saw it, I was like, it's pretty good, and by the ending, I was like, wow, like that was wild. And since then, I've seen it quite a few times, and automatically, I'm like really into this film, and I can't recommend this enough. So yeah, 1987, Revenge of the Living Dead Girls. Doesn't get much better than this. So thanks again. This is Jason Dean. If you get a chance, please like and subscribe to my channel. It's greatly appreciated. I appreciate all the love and support I've been getting, and we'll see you next time. Have a great day. Peace.